fully understand why ESPN did not promote this garbage. I fully understand now why ESPN has buried this polished turd at the bottom of their streaming service, ESPN Plus. It's kind of similar to what CNN did with Chris Wallace. They pulled him off CNN. They bury him on HBO Max. Who's talking to Chris Wallace? I know who isn't listening or watching Chris Wallace. America. Last week, we briefly talked about some dude named Ibram Kendi. You guys remember that? Fun fact here, and I'm sure you're going to be surprised by this news. Ibram Kendi, that is not his real name. Like most identifiers, he is choosing to identify with a name that he feels better suits his true self. According to multiple reports, Ibram Kendi, he was actually born Henry Rogers. Now, in his defense, if you're aspiring to be a high-ranking official in the BLM Army, you can't have a name like Henry Rogers. I mean, it doesn't get much wider than that. At some point, Brigadier General Rogers, he decided to change his name to Ibram X. Rogers. Well, KC, where does the Kendi come from? Well, I'm glad you asked. Ibram, he was a starving political activist. Now, in order to be an effective activist, you gotta have financial resources, you gotta have money. Some choose to obtain these resources by stealing merchandise from high-end department stores. For those that are afraid to get their hands dirty like Henry, they choose to go with the more domesticated route. They marry someone who is rich, someone who has money. Mr. Rogers, he fell in woke love with a doctor. Not only did he take her professional title and start identifying as a doctor himself, he also took her last name. Yeah. The dude took the last name of the woman. That is the type of man that Mr. Rogers is. Like we talked about last week, Henry, he produced a documentary for ESPN titled Skin in the Game. It's a 5-part series dedicated to highlighting mythical racism in sports. Now, I want to go ahead and thank the guys over at Outkick for summarizing this garbage for us. I watched about maybe 10 or 15 minutes of the first episode last week. I turned it off. It was painfully boring television. Now, the first episode, it was titled Power to the Players. This episode was dedicated to professional athletes who use their platform to fight for social justice. Now, once again, that term social justice, it's not defined. Well, Mr. Rogers, what is social justice? It's justice that likes to socialize. Couple of minutes into this turd, we already have the panel falling to their knees to worship the true champion of shit fuckery, Colleen Kaepernick. Oh, I wish Colleen was still playing in the NFL. I miss stroking my woke boner seeing him on his knees. Mr. Rogers, he explained that Brother Kaepernick was fighting to put an end to police brutality. We need to stop the violence. At this point, Mr. Rogers, he welcomes the human turtle Howard Bryant to the panel. Wait a minute here. I thought we were promoting anti-violence. Howie Bryant has a long history of violence. I mean, have you seen those Turtles movies? They're hurting people with nunchucks. They use the power of their shells to shock people. Not only does Howie practice the fine art of violence in the sewers fighting Master Shredder, he also practices the fine art of violence in his domicile. I seem to remember Howard Bryant being arrested for domestic violence. If I remember correctly, he committed this act of violence in front of his own child. But, I'm sure there was a logical explanation for all this. I'm sure they were just wrestling. I guess from ESPN's perspective, it kind of makes sense to bring in Howie to do a segment on violence. I mean, after all, he's very familiar with it. Fake Dr. Kendi, he asked Howie what it's like to be black in America. According to Howie, it's very expensive. You definitely pay a price to be black in America. There's no question about it. I have a question, Howie. What is the price? What is the price of being black in America? Let's look at this logically for a second. Let's look at some black members of the mainstream media and see what price they paid to be black in America. Let's go ahead and start with Joy Reid. Joy Reid paid a heavy price. She was given a free ride to Harvard. Why? Affirmative action. Her only qualification was the melanin in her skin. What about Bomani Jones? The Bobo, he's had it real rough. Bomani Jones has been given more undeserved opportunities in the mainstream media than anyone in the history of the business. This dude has never succeeded at anything. You know those dunk tanks they have at the county fair? They usually give you a baseball or something small to throw at the target to dunk that dumbass that's sitting above the water. Since Bomani Jones is the originator of the huge embarrassing failure, they knew he couldn't stand at a distance and hit the target with a small baseball. Instead, they give the Bobo a bat. They allowed him to stand a couple of feet away from the target. All he had to do was swing. That's it. What does the Bobo do? He mistakes the bat for a cucumber, inserting it into the promised land. Speaking of huge embarrassing failures, what about Jemele Hill? How many opportunities has Smelly Jemele been given, and how many times has she failed? ESPN, failure. Television show on Vice, failure. Six-figure woke welfare checks from Spotify to draw listeners to their platform, failure. Someone please explain to me the price these people are paying. Seems to me all of them have become rich by being black in America. Next up, the fake doctor. He introduces us to Gwen Berry. Well, KC, who in the hell is Glen Terry? Longtime subscribers to this channel, you guys are going to remember Gwen Berry. Back in 2009, a young Hurricane Chris, he even wrote a rap song about her. Gwen Berry, Gwen Berry, Gwen Berry, Gwen Berry. During the 2020 Olympics, Gwendolyn represented America on the global stage by promoting Black Lives Matter and disrespecting the national anthem. Gwen's also another expert on mythical racism. Like Jemele Hill, Gwendolyn is brilliant at creating stories that have no basis in reality. She joined the panel to offer the perspective of a professional athlete on the issue of mythical racism. I didn't know Gwen Berry was a professional athlete. I thought Olympians were considered to be amateur athletes. I mean, she specializes in the hammer throw. Hell, I'm an expert at tossing the hammer. I hate doing manual labor. I don't like fixing things. I'm not a DIY guy. Back when I was broke and had to fix things around the house out of necessity, I would often get frustrated and throw the hammer. Does that make me a professional athlete? Gwendolyn, though, she wanted to talk about the contracts that athletes sign in order to play professionally. Listen to her comparison. Listen to this originality. Because Gwen, she steals the strategy of Megan Rapinoe and completely rips off Colin Kaepernick. Watch for yourself.
So, you have to sign this contract and sign this document and sign this document. It's like you're binded to this. And then if you break that, that's your livelihood, that's your life. So we the new slaves. Athletes are literally the new slaves because we need this. Our families, our friends depend on this contract to eat.
Was that Gwen Berry? I didn't recognize her. This is the Gwen Berry that I remember. Ooh, sissy. Standing there in all her glory, disrespecting America on the global stage. The young lady in the video doesn't resemble the Gwen Berry that I remember, but I'll take their word for it and assume that that was the lovely Gwendolyn. Here we go again with comparing professional athletes to slaves. Do I really need to sit here and explain this shit sandwich? Hell, I can't even call it a shit sandwich because the sandwich, it has two truths with the lie in between. There was absolutely nothing truthful about what Gwen Berry just said. We have to have these contracts. We have to feed our families. No one is forcing you to sign the contract. If your family is hungry, there are services offered at the WNBA dump where they offer free scraps along with the complimentary shower on Woke Bath Wednesday. Obviously, this was nothing but race-baiting propaganda, but believe it or not, it gets even worse. Episode 2 was titled The Invisible Struggle. This episode was dedicated to black female athletes. Now, the purpose of this episode, it was to convince you that black female athletes are carrying the weight of the world. Outside of Venus and Serena Williams, I don't think I could name another black female athlete. Well, Casey, what about Bob Griner? What about Bobby? I thought we were talking about athletes, not trash engineers. If you walked the streets and you asked random people to name 5 black female athletes, actually, you know what? Let's just remove race from the equation. If you asked random people to name 5 female athletes, 95% of the people, they wouldn't be able to do it. Why? Because people do not care about women's sports. I know that sounds harsh, but the truth often does. And I don't say it to be mean, it's just the reality. You don't have to take my word for it, just go look at their television ratings. Matter of fact, ESPN actually proved how anonymous female athletes are with the inclusion of their next guest. How many of you have heard of Mariah Stackhouse? Now, when I saw the name, I assumed that she was married to Jerry Stackhouse, the former NBA player. But Mariah Stackhouse, she is a professional golfer on the LPGA Tour. And I use the term professional golfer loosely here because Mariah, she doesn't rank in the top 300. ESPN included her story to highlight the mental struggles that she went through by falling out of the top 300. That has nothing to do with race. That's just human nature. I'm sure white golfers struggle when they're failing to perform. The only person that I know that's comfortable with failure is Bomani Jones. But according to this documentary, Mariah's struggles, they're different because she's a black golfer. You see, golf is mostly a white sport. So naturally, according to shitfuckery logic, a black golfer will struggle through mythical racism. But it's strange. I don't remember hearing Tiger Woods complain about this. I wonder why. I wonder if Tiger Woods didn't complain because he was the best golfer in the world. Tiger Woods actually benefited from his race because he offered something completely different to the sport of golf. This documentary was absolute trash. This is a prime example of why I call it mythical racism. They are literally making things up. They had nothing to reference. They had nothing to talk about because none of this is real. 2 or 3 years ago, this documentary, it would have been featured on ESPN. Today, it's buried behind a paywall on ESPN Plus. I thought ESPN was dedicated to fighting mythical racism. Why would they bury this documentary behind a paywall? Because ESPN knows that the business of mythical racism is bankrupt. ESPN is struggling to maintain their audience. Ratings right now are in the pooper. Hell, they can't even get Pat McAfee to draw an audience on their network. ESPN knew that if they aired this documentary, or even if they promoted it, they could potentially lose more viewers and subscribers. And right now, ESPN can't afford to lose anyone. But give me your thoughts. Gwen Berry compares professional athletes to slaves. ESPN buries this documentary behind a paywall, guaranteeing that no one is going to watch it. The most interesting part of this story, from my perspective, is Ibram Kendi taking his wife's last name. Have any of you guys seen this documentary? Like I said, I made it through 10, maybe 15 minutes. I got bored and turned it off. Painfully boring television, but let me know if you watched it. Sound off in the comments below. Like, subscribe, share the video. I appreciate you guys and your continued support. Best way to contact me is by email at btlkc84@gmail.com, KC_BTL84 on Twitter. I'll see you guys later.